Okay, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dennis Fong. He's a founder and CEO of Place TV. It's the leading platform to watch and share gameplay videos. He's known as Thresh in gaming cycles, and he was named by the Guinness World Records officially as the first professional gamer in history. So very proud to have him here. He was also called the Michael Jordan of video games by the Wall Street Journal before he turned 23. And he won prizes that also came in touch with money and cars, but he used that kind of value to actually create and start a number of companies, among those gamers.com, and more recently basically Place TV, which he will now talk to us about. Okay, so welcome, Dennis.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm not exactly here to talk about Place TV. I'm here just to talk about my gaming history. I'll talk a little bit about gaming and entrepreneurship and what it's like to be a pro gamer. So as Ingmar said, I am in the Guinness Book of World Records as the first pro gamer. That was back in the 90s. So I'm actually 40 years old. But my girlfriend says I look like Benjamin Button because I seem to be getting younger as I get older. And if you see some of these pictures, you'll actually think that I actually look older back when I was in my teens, which is pretty weird. So I won a Ferrari in a Quake tournament in 1997. So pro gaming and eSports actually has been around for quite a long time. It's kind of ebbed and flowed. So I was pretty well known back in the day. In first-person shooters, I was the world champion of Doom, Quake, Quake 2, and I retired by the time Quake 3 became really popular. And my buddy, who I mentored, Fatality, if you guys have heard of him, kind of came on after me. I also helped launch the first pro gaming league, which was called the Professional Gamers League, the PGL, in 1998. And I actually had a cool baseball card, which you can see on the screen there with stats and stuff. I wish they did more of these days. It was the first kind of big name pro gamers league, also focused on Quake and StarCraft. And recently, I was inducted into the newly created eSports Hall of Fame. So I was the second inductee. Now, for most of you, you've probably never heard of me. Probably don't care about kind of an old man's history. But you may have heard of League of Legends. So my buddies started League of Legends, and as an homage to me, they actually created a champion named Thresh, which is my username and handle, what I was known as in gaming circles, and they named it after me. So for those of you guys that play LOL, you may have played me before. My only complaint about this champion is that he's a support character. I'm a first-person shooter guy. I really should have been Tristana, if you guys play League of Legends, with the rocket jump and stuff, because I basically invented the rocket jump. And I also, if you guys are gamers here and you use the WASD key configuration, I also popularized that. So whether you like it or not, I am either at blame for that being the popular key configuration, because before me it was actually the arrow keys, believe it or not. That's how old school I am. Pretty random reference, which I haven't been able to confirm yet, but my handle in Quake, when I used to play, I created my own team called Death Row, and my favorite number, or lucky number, is number 11. So I always played as D11 Thresh. In Hunger Games, there was a tribute named Thresh from District 11. Never got any royalties from that. Never confirmed that was actually based on me, but it seemed like a pretty big coincidence that it would be. Alongside gaming, and part of the reason why I retired is I also got into starting companies. And I'm now on to my 5th venture-backed company that I've started. Actually, the main reason why I retired from pro gaming or competing professionally, because I was the world champion for 5 years, never lost a tournament, is because by that time, my first company, which was called Gamers.com, was about 130 employees, and I was the CEO. And it was just, I didn't have time to dedicate to being the best gamer in the world. But as Ingmar mentioned, I've started 5 companies. The first one was Gamers.com. I started when I was 19. sold that one, and then went on to start a bunch of companies. 4 out of the 5 were gaming related. The only one that isn't is Lithium, which is like a social CRM kind of boring enterprise company, but it happens to be the biggest. It's valued at about $500 million right now. But what I really care about and passionate about is games and creating products and stuff for gamers, because for the longest time, venture capital and funding really was focused on just making games and not tools for gamers. That's obviously changed a lot with some of the more popular tools today, like Discord and stuff, but back then it wasn't the case, and I felt like it was part of my duty to actually fill that gap. So getting into a little bit of my personal gaming history, I grew up around computers. My dad worked at a tech company, HP, for over 20 years, and I'm the middle of 3 brothers. And so we were always surrounded with computers. So we always had multiple computers at home that were networked. And back in those days, having a networked setup at home was pretty rare. So I think that was probably one of our biggest advantages, was that we got to play games against each other all the time, whereas people that wanted to play against each other online, required quite a bit of work to get that set up. For those of you that won't appreciate that history, you actually have to be pretty techie. So you had to have a game or a PC that could play a game like Doom. Then you had to have a modem, which most of you in here probably don't even know what that is exactly. And then you have to figure out how to set up your computer to call your friend's computer and have him pick it up using his computer and his game. And so that whole process, you're using phone lines, right? So you're calling each other by phone using your computer, would take, 5-10 minutes to set up. And, mid-game, oftentimes, our moms would pick up the phone to make a call and it'd cut us off and drop us from the game. I think that was also the first iteration of rage quitting, because you could pretend that your mom picked up the phone and disconnected you from the game while you're losing, and then you have to restart and play again. But gaming for me really actually forced me to learn about tech, because it did require a lot of technical knowledge to get into these games. And it's also contributed to me almost getting disowned by my parents multiple times. The first time was when I told my dad that I was dropping out of school to start a company, gaming company. He almost disowned me then. The second time was when right after I won my Ferrari, believe it or not. I won the Ferrari, I was super happy. Got home and my dad's, he's like, "What are you gonna do with this thing?" And I said, "Well, I'm keeping it." And he almost disowned me then, because the tax bill on that thing was like $60K or something. Which no one ever talks about in terms of winning prizes. And then the third time he almost disowned me was when, after I sold my first company for a decent chunk of change, I told him I was not going back to school, and he was holding out hope that I would. So good times. He's over it now, but it was pretty fun for a little bit. So how did I get into pro gaming? How did this whole thing even start? So I was just a kid playing games, from my bedroom. This is, I think, was right around 95, 96. And, I didn't really realize, I knew that I never lost. But, it's not like there was a career like there is now. And I remember, so I think I was like, 16 or 17, and I got a phone call from a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. And I honestly had no idea who the Wall Street Journal was at the time. So he's like, "Hey, I'm thinking of writing a story on online gaming, this new thing. Is it cool if I come by and interview you and hang out with you for a day just to see what this whole thing's about?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So we scheduled time, I don't know, it was like a few weeks later. I completely forgot that he was coming. So he shows up at my door, it's my parents' house, and he's like, "Hey, I'm Joseph Pereira. I'm here to interview you for the Wall Street Journal." And I think it was like 11 a.m. and he had just woken me up. And I was like, "Dude, I just woke up. Could you just come back in an hour?" So he goes and apparently sits in his car for an hour, comes back. Really nice guy. And he ends up hanging out with me for about a day and a half. And he was really fascinated by all of the online interactions and this whole virtual world that he had never heard of at the time. And he ended up writing a story, which you see there. And it ended up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. And for those that are not familiar, very few people get stencil drawings or whatever that pixelated thing is. I got one on the homepage or the front page. I think it was Bill Clinton was the other one that had a stencil drawing on that front page of the day. And that's actually literally what kicked off my pro gaming career. I wasn't making any money before then. The very next day, I started getting phone calls and emails. CEO of Hasbro, CEO of NVIDIA, just big companies saying, hey, we want to talk to you. Can you help consult? Can we sponsor you? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And within probably, within less than a year, I was making $150,000 a year just through sponsorships, which is still pretty decent compared to what some of these guys make today. And I was lucky because I was the first. This is a picture of me on CNN in 1998, extolling and talking about the future of eSports. And as you can see there, I think I do look older then than I do now. Somehow, because I think I was like 18 there. Yeah, it's weird. Maybe gaming is the fountain of youth. You stay indoors, you don't see the sun. I think there's something there, to be honest. So anyway, what is esports? I assume most people in here at least have heard of it. For those that haven't, it's obviously a really big deal. Sells out stadiums now. I think I might have been actually speaking at a class at Stanford maybe 10, 15 years ago, talking about how I thought someday it would be bigger than the NBA. And the reasons to me were pretty obvious to me back then and are still today, right? There's no physical limitations to gaming. Actually one of my best friends in gaming is paralyzed from the waist down. He's in a wheelchair and his username's Handyman. But it doesn't prevent him from being an awesome kick-ass gamer. And so, there's no gender limitations, no physical limitations, there's no geographic limitations. I just believe that, as games, as it evolved, more people would understand kind of the basics of what makes a good gamer in these games. And by virtue of that, you would have an appreciation for watching other people play and appreciating the skill that you're seeing on screen. And I think it's largely happened, or it's happening now. And I think part of the reason is because you have games like Counter-Strike, which have been around for over a decade. First-person shooters have been over, almost 2 decades now. And games like League of Legends, which were based on Dota, which are very, very old as well. So I think there's a generation of people that can look at a game and see what's going on and appreciate the skill that's going on. And as you've probably heard, maybe have not, it actually is crushing most of the major sports. More people tuned in to watch the League of Legends World Championships than tuned in to watch the NBA Game 7 or the World Series. So it's a pretty big deal. And a lot of the excitement that you might hear about and see or read about in esports is because even though the viewership is huge, I think this year they said we're going to be close to about 400 million unique viewers of esports globally. The revenue per viewer is actually really tiny compared to traditional sports. I think the average revenue per viewer in esports is less than $3 today. And when compared to a traditional sport, it's around $15. And I think the NFL is probably close to $100 per viewer. And so the reason why there's so much excitement, you have, my buddies looking at starting a team for the Lakers that's branded the Lakers as an example. There's a lot of big professional sports organizations that are looking into getting into this is because of this stat, which is there's a lot of people watching it, but not a lot of money in it yet. And it's probably the most secretly mainstream thing today, especially with a generation of people kind of aged, 14 to 25. What's really cool is actually I was part of the very first eSports event. It was actually in 1995, believe it or not. It was called Deathmatch 95. There was a gaming service called Duango, which had about 25 servers all across the country and in Europe. And they found the regional champions there, flew us all to Microsoft headquarters. And there were about 20 of some of us at a big Microsoft event where actually Bill Gates spoke. I think I have a video of that. I don't know if it's going to show up here. So I can exit this. It's actually a pretty funny video that I found. It's really grainy, but that's kind of how most games were back then. Here. Jesus. That's Doom, for those that are not familiar with it. Just wait for it. That's Bill Gates. Holding a shotgun.
These games are getting really realistic. I'm playing the big Doom tournament. You might wonder what I'm doing here. Well, I'm getting kind of an inside look at some of these new games. I think you'll be amazed at all the new games we're going to show you here this evening. We've got a few key points to remember.
Yeah, we don't have to watch the whole thing.
Windows 95 is the best setup, best integration. With the toolkits we're putting together, we're going to make sure people are very focused on Windows 95.
Yeah. That's how old I am, right there. It's there. So that was, so they held a really big event at Microsoft headquarters to launch kind of that. And I was lucky enough to be a part of it, and I ended up winning that tournament. There were hundreds of spectators even then cheering it on. So that was the first taste of eSports. And I remember talking to Jay Wilbur, who was the CEO of id Software at the time, and I ran into him a couple years ago, and we were reminiscing on that event being actually literally the first eSports event ever. So it's pretty cool. I often get asked what makes you good at games, or what makes a good gamer. For me, they kind of coined a term around something that I'm kind of naturally really good at or innately really good at. And I believe every single person in the world has kind of a superpower. Mine happens to be the ability to kind of see things through other people's eyes in real time. And it, ultimately maybe just a combination of pattern recognition and, some level of kind of empathy. But when I play games, I can literally see through the other person's eyes and be able to predict what they're doing. And they used to call that, Thresh ESP, because it seemed like I had ESP when I was playing against my opponents. And I was able to predict, what they're doing, what they're thinking before they even realize it. And what's interesting is that I found that that skill was really applicable to starting companies. It doesn't seem super intuitive at the time that, if you're good at games, that you could be good at starting companies. But in particular with that skill, when you think about, business development or sales, if you could put yourself in the eyes of, or the shoes of the person you're selling to, it's pretty helpful. When it comes to marketing, putting yourself in the eyes of users, when you're trying to raise money, putting yourself in the eyes of investors, and if you're just building really cool shit, and I know what's cool because I'm a gamer and I generally build products for myself. You can apply that to starting companies. I always viewed gaming as kind of like speed chess. I think a lot of people mistakenly think that, the top pro gamers just have insanely good reflexes. And I think ultimately they probably index higher on the reflex side, but it's really not about physical kind of talent. It's really about mental processing, and at the speed at which you can process the information that's coming to you, because there's a million things that are happening at the same time. And so I always likened it to speed chess, where you're just trying to outthink and outsmart your opponent. And if you ever have to react, if you're surprised by something and you have to react and you pull off this amazing maneuver, well, you're probably not in the right place, or not strategically in the right, or tactically in the right place. And so, I used to get told a lot by a lot of people that watching me play was really boring, and it always seemed like my opponents were really dumb. But really, it was just more about strategy and tactics for me than just pure technical ability. And when you look at a lot of the top gamers today, it's also the case, right? They all practice an insane amount, 12 to 16 hours a day. But there's still guys that separate from the pack. And I think part of it is their innate ability to process the things that are going on just faster than everybody else. Things I've learned about gaming and entrepreneurship. I've learned a lot of really interesting things. I think number one, in gaming, what I used to practice for a lot is shoring up my weaknesses, right? Because even back then, there were demos and replays and stuff that you could watch on your opponents. It's obviously a lot easier to get today, but your opponents are going to study you, and they're going to learn what you do. I know I used to always purposely exploit my opponent's weaknesses. So if I knew that they were weak at certain weapons, I would force them to use those weapons. If I knew they were weak in certain maps or certain situations, I would force them into those situations. Predominantly, I would say probably 80% of my time when I was spent practicing would be practicing the things that I really sucked at. You want to be really well-rounded. But in entrepreneurship and starting companies, what I found actually, and what I've learned over the years, is you actually try to do the opposite. Is that when you hire somebody, as an example, you hire them for the one thing that they just kick ass at. So you hire them for their strengths. And instead of, and I think it's a mistake that a lot of big companies make, they force people to kind of shore up their weaknesses. So if they're weak at a certain thing, they spend an inordinate amount of time working on the things that they're weak at. And to me, there's just the ROI on that is really poor. What we do, what I've learned that's worked is that you hire people for their strengths, you have them work on their strengths, and the things that they're weak at, you just hire someone else that's good at those things and super strong at those things. So that was an interesting learning. I've also learned in gaming, I think just part of my nature and the way that I'm wired is, I try to be ruthlessly efficient. In gaming, again, it's about processing a lot of information really efficiently, and then acting on it, right? And so my brain is naturally kind of wired that way. And for the first couple companies that I started, I kind of operated with that mentality. And I also applied kind of the way that, my quote unquote superpower, which is putting myself in other people's shoes, onto others. So a very common thing that I would say at the beginning of a one-on-one meeting with somebody would be like, well, if I were you, I would have done X, Y, and Z. The truth is actually most of the time I was right. I would see things before other people see them, right? So if someone's trying to get from A to P, I can see instantly within a few minutes of sitting down with someone that they only got to D. And in the interests of being ruthlessly efficient, I would just stop them. Just be like, hey, wait. I know you think you're getting to P, but you're actually getting to D, and here's how you get to Q. And I thought, honestly, I was doing them a service. And what I learned actually is that, even though in the short term, it's actually really helpful to them, and you get more things done, in the medium to long term, it's actually incredibly inefficient because they never learn. They never learn the right way to do things. They never learn the way to think. And I've realized actually the best way to learn is to make mistakes. And that's what I did in gaming. And I just for whatever reason, I chose not to do that, not to operate my company in a way that allowed my team to do that. And so, in more recent times, I found that, giving people leash and letting them kind of make their own mistakes was far more efficient, and in the end, far more successful. And that's also not mentioning the human element of it, which, again, in gaming, I was kind of known as just being ice cold. So I'm very good at compartmentalizing emotions, which contributes a lot to why I was really good at games and competing in tournaments, because I don't get nervous when I'm on stage. I don't get nervous when I'm competing. But when you're operating a company, there's a human element of it that doesn't factor into gaming. And so, I think some people talk about having compassion or managing compassionately. And that's something that I've tried to do kind of in more recent times. There's a quote by Jeff Weiner, who's the CEO of LinkedIn. He said, wisdom without compassion is ruthlessness, and compassion without wisdom is folly. It basically means if you give someone the answer and you don't try to walk a mile in their shoes to understand how they got to that answer, then that's just being really ruthless. And that's one of the things that I've tried to practice in more recent times. So that's kind of my gaming history. The other thing that I really wanted to talk about was just what I'm working on now. Hopefully there's a lot of gamers in here. Obviously I'm very passionate about gaming, and one of my big regrets is, like, if you go online and you search for like Thresh clips, like Thresh competition, videos, there's very, very few of them. Part of it is just the technology back then wasn't that great. And the other thing is, I think one of the things that makes gaming so awesome is that it enables ordinary people to do extraordinary things in games. These games are designed so that every once in a blue moon you could pull off that really epic moment. Oftentimes, at least for me, before I started Plays TV, it's something that I would just go, I talk at the office, I'd be like, dude, you won't believe what happened last night, kind of moments. And I wanted to create something that captured that in the same way that, an Instagram or a Snapchat captures these moments that happen in your lives and allows you to relive with others and, have fun doing it. I felt like that was missing in games. And, even something like Twitch, which I'm a huge fan of, live streaming is something that's not for everybody. It's probably not for most people. You have to be both entertaining and good to build a following. And so I built a company, which is the one I'm working on now, called Plays.tv, which is a social video sharing platform for gamers. And the thing that I really wanted to solve here with Plays TV is to eliminate all of the hassle of sharing. Like, no one wants to go record themselves playing, edit out a video, like put a bunch of effects on it and share it. That just takes too long. And we're all kind of inherently lazy, especially gamers. And so, what Plays TV does is it records automatically for you while you're playing games like League and CSGO, whatever, and actually figures out all the key moments that happens in the games for you. So it actually knows when you got a kill, an assist, a death, when you planted the bomb, whatever, and it'll actually create highlights out of all of those moments, and kind of show it to you on a timeline, so that if you did something really cool. It literally takes seconds from exiting a game, finding the moment, and sharing it to your friends or to Facebook or Twitter or whatever. That's really what I'm working on right now. Unfortunately, I didn't have a ton of time to prepare for this talk. So I'm opening it up for questions, if anyone has any questions about stuff.